Good evening. On Channel 1, Ostankiно, the evening overview of the most important events of the day. The heads of Russia and the Federal Republic of Germany, Boris Yeltsin and Helmut Kohl, during a telephone conversation, exchanged views on Bosnian regularization. The Minister of Foreign Affairs of Russia, Andrei Kozyrev, called on the Serbs not to test the patience of the international community. The leader of the Palestinian Liberation Organization, the president of the Palestinian nation, Yasser Arafat, was guaranteed in Moscow Russia's support in the process of the talks with Israel. The Speaker of the Higher Chamber of the Russian Parliament, Vladimir Shumeyko, expresses himself for submitting the candidacy of Boris Yeltsin at the presidential elections in 1996. 6 minutes ago, we received the following information from TASS. Boris Yeltsin stated today that the world community is called to take decisive actions for the political resolution of the Bosnian crisis. In the statement, the President of Russia emphasizes that the conflict in Bosnia-Herzegovina is on the verge of a dangerous escalation, despite the energetic diplomatic efforts of Russia jointly with the United Nations and other members of the international community. The leadership of the Bosnian Serbs must fulfill obligations made to Russia to cease attacks and withdraw from the city Gorazde, declared by the UN as a safety zone, and provide conditions for the entry of UN forces there and deblockade UN personnel in Bosnia-Herzegovina. In this connection, the President of Russia emphasized, "I confirm the proposal on holding a high-level meeting of Russia, the United States, and the European Union with the UN's presence." Of course, said Boris Yeltsin, such a meeting must be carefully prepared for, and corresponding instructions were given to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Russia. The President of Russia, Boris Yeltsin, and the Chancellor of Germany, Helmut Kohl, today during a telephone conversation, which was placed on the initiative of the Chancellor, discussed the Bosnian crisis, said the press service of the head of the Russian government. Boris Yeltsin noted that Russia had and is still making maximum efforts to not allow crisis development of the situation around Gorazde. The escalation of military activities was unsuccessful in avoiding Bosnian Serbs don't keep their word. The President emphasized that Russia in the future will make contributions to Bosnian regularization, support peace initiatives on resolving the conflict. Boris Yeltsin and Helmut Kohl exchanged views on the proposal of France to activate the efforts on Bosnian regularization through calling a meeting in Bosnia of a format which would include representatives of Russia, the United States, the UN, and the European Union. In the Belgrade airport, Suchin, the first of 4 airplanes landed with the new battalion of Russian peacekeeping forces. 450 troops will be sent to East Slavonia, to the main base of the Russian contingent in former Yugoslavia. 95 troops arriving recently in Zagreb, or in the next few days in Zagreb, will supplement the 2nd Battalion in the Serb part of Sarajevo. All voluntarily decided to serve in the hottest point of Europe in one of the most critical moments of the Balkan crisis. After yesterday's crisis, when the situation around Gorazde seemed to be absolutely hopeless and without a solution, and Vitaly Churkin, interrupting his talks in Pali, flew to Moscow, laying all responsibility on Bosnian Serbs. The leaders of the Serbian Republic obviously reconsidered and attempted to cease the fire. From Gorazde, 7 of the 12 UN military observers have been evacuated. According to Lord Owen, this week talks will resume between leadership of the Serb Republic and UN representatives in Bosnia-Herzegovina. According to the latest information from TASS, the Serb side did not fulfill its promise to stop military activities in Gorazde. All night and the first part of the day, Serb forces continue to fire at the city. A significant number of Serb tanks and infantry regiments are already on the left bank of the Drina River, which flows through the city. However, not all regions of Gorazde are under their control yet. In the city hospital, where expecting evacuation are almost 700 injured people, this morning 4 shells fell. The hospital was also shot at with tear gas.
About this new initiative, and I received the support from all the members of the Security Council.
The Secretary General of the UN, Boutros Ghali, asked the UN Council permission to launch air attacks of retaliation against Serb positions to defend the safety zones in Bosnia and Herzegovina. The permanent UN representative of Russia, Yuri Vonetsov, stated that Russia is against the automatic launching of air attacks of NATO in Bosnia and Herzegovina without the permission of the UN Defense Council. The decision of NATO regarding the request of the Secretary General of the UN, Boutros Ghali, on launching preventing air attacks in Bosnia-Herzegovina will occur no sooner than Wednesday, when in Brussels, gathering for a weekly session will be the permanent representatives of all 16 member countries. This was stated today at the press conference by the representative of the NATO headquarters. According to the latest from the agency Radar, the leader of the Bosnian Serbs, Radovan Karadzic, threatened today that a terrible war would break out if NATO launches new air attacks on Serb positions. The President of the United States, Bill Clinton, is conducting today emergency meetings with the Secretary of State, Warren Christopher, the Advisor on National Security, Anthony Lake, and several other foreign policy advisors on the situation in Bosnia-Herzegovina. As the New York Times says, quoting sources within the administration of the President, the advisors will recommend to Clinton to call for broadening of NATO attacks on Bosnian Serbs, and if that is with the latter, do not remove their forces from Goršte and other safety zones. As Interfax learned, tomorrow in the Kremlin, chaired by the President of Russia, Boris Yeltsin, will be a meeting of the Defense Council of the Russian Federation. They plan that a report on the situation of former Yugoslavia and the peacekeeping efforts of Russia in hot points in the Balkans will be presented by the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Russia, Andrei Kozyrev. I would most decisively not recommend to the Serb side to test the patience of the international community, said today to the press the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Andrei Kozyrev. According to Kozyrev, in Moscow, they're analyzing information currently and results which were brought from former Yugoslavia by the special envoy of the President, the Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs, Vitaly Churkin. I wouldn't want to speak now about final conclusions, said the minister. Today, the work visit continues to Moscow of the chairman of the PLO and the president of the Palestinian nation, Yasser Arafat. Today at the meeting in the Kremlin with Yasser Arafat, Boris Yeltsin stated that Russia, as a mediator in the Middle East regularization, intends to provide the leader of the Palestinian Liberation Organization political support. The president expressed hope for more successful progress of the Palestinian-Israeli dialogue after the visit of Yasser Arafat and the anticipated dialogues next week in Moscow with the Prime Minister of Israel, Yitzhak Rabin. Today's discussion with Yasser Arafat and Andrei Kozyrev on the problem of renewing Palestinian-Israeli talks on Gaza and Jericho showed that the leader of the PLO could count on Russia's support in overcoming difficulties and in the battle with extremism. In a conversation with the press, the chairman of the PLO stated that the unfulfillment by Tel Aviv of its obligations on the withdrawal of forces from Gaza and Jericho gives the opponents of the peace process time to strengthen their ranks. And at the same time, in the opinion of the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Russia, despite difficulties, the talks must continue, and our side will contribute in absolutely every way. After the meeting of Yasser Arafat with Andrei Kozyrev, a Russian-Palestinian agreement was signed on cultural and scientific cooperation. Today, in the St. Daniel's Monastery, the leader of the PLO organization was hosted by the Patriarch of Moscow and all Russia, Alexei II. The agreement on achieving civil accord will be signed on the 28th of April in the Kremlin by a majority. Such confidence was expressed by the chairman of the Federal Council of Russia, Vladimir Shumeyko, today at a meeting with the press. He emphasized that the agreement is a document of an open type and therefore various political forces can join not unilaterally but gradually. Vladimir Shumeyko also stated that the Federal Council cannot work on a non-permanent basis. Obviously, one will have to introduce changes into the constitution of the country, he presumed. And finally, the Speaker of the Higher Chamber expressed himself for submitting the candidacy of the head of state, Boris Yeltsin, at the presidential elections in 1996. If Boris Yeltsin would be able to work one more term, then it would be only for the benefit of Russia, said Vladimir Shumeyko. The Center of Operational Information of the administration of the President of Russia today stated that Boris Yeltsin received an announcement from the Union of Cossack Forces of Russia from abroad. It says in it that at the Conference of Ottomans of the Union of Cossack Forces of Russia abroad, which was held on the 16th of April in the historic capital of the Cossack forces, the city Novocherkassk, ratified the project of the agreement on achieving civil accord in Russia and is prepared to sign it and also take on its part of responsibility for its fulfillment. During the next few days in Moscow, consultations will begin of the Russian government with representatives of organs of state power with all political movements of the Chechnya Republic. This was stated today to Interfax by the head of the administration of the President of Russia, Sergei Filatov. He also denied rumors that the President of Chechnya, Jakhar Dudayev, sent Boris Yeltsin a letter with objections against such dialogues. According to Sergei Filatov, Jakhar Dudayev did send an official letter to the President of Russia, but in it expressed was gratitude for the official apology which the leader of the country made for the deportation of the peoples during the Stalin regime. Sergei Filatov also stated that the consultations with Grozny on behalf of the government of Russia will be conducted by the Vice Premier Sergei Shakharai. In Almaty today, the first session opened of the new parliament, elected during the 7th of March elections. The President of Kazakhstan, Nursultan Nazarbayev, speaking at the session, emphasized that for the first time in the Republic, a professional parliament was formed which will work on a permanent basis. Nursultan Nazarbayev stated that he intends in the beginning of May to send to Parliament a letter with an analysis of the economic situation and his proposals on emerging from the crisis. The President of Kazakhstan also noted the importance of integration processes in the framework of the CIS and expressed regret that no one except for Kyrgyzia supported his idea of creating a Eurasian Union. Today in the Kremlin, the regular work meeting took place of the President of Russia, Boris Yeltsin, with the Chairman of Government, Viktor Chernomyrdin, dedicated to discussion of current political economic issues. Such discussions of the heads of state and the Cabinet of Ministers are held weekly on Tuesdays. Viktor Chernomyrdin informed the President on his results of his trip to St. Petersburg, where Monday he participated in the opening of the annual meeting of the Board of Directors of the European Bank of Reconstruction and Development. At the meeting with the President and Premier, examined also was the project of the budget for 1994, adopted last week by the State Duma on its basis and sent for fine-tuning by representatives of Parliament and Cabinet. In the State Duma, parliamentary hearings ended on privatization. Polarity of views on results was obvious, and especially negative assessment was given by the opposition, proposing to stop privatization and replace its creators. Representatives of democratic forces and experts noted that it's progressing without turbulence and fulfills one of its main goals, to abolish monopoly of state property, which is the deterrent to economic development. Various views were heard on the yield of privatization. A serious problem is presented by the relatively low value of auctioned companies and therefore the lower than expected revenues for the budget. However, an immediate change of conditions could probably not cause a positive emotion of shareholders and labor collectors of those plants which are beginning to be auctioned today, feels Anatoly Chubaits. I never expected that simply by auctioning suddenly by 2 times salaries would increase. I'm satisfied because I see those possibilities which auctioneering has opened before companies, the possibility to have access to investments and work in the valuable paper markets, and the change in the structure of companies, which is already beginning to work. The President of Russia, Boris Yeltsin, signed a decree to relieve Boris Nemtsov from the post of the presidential representative in the Nizhgorodsk district on his own request. Also, the Chairman of Government, Viktor Chernomyrdin, signed a series of documents which, in fact, entrench as an example to conduct land reform in Russia the experience of privatization of land in the Nizhgorodsk district. This was learned by a correspondent of Business TASS from reliable sources. The new program of agrarian reform in Russia will not in any way influence the current planting season. Since the second half of the year, the situation will begin to change. In any case, such hope was expressed at the meeting of the Council on Agrarian Policies under the government, which was held in Moscow. Work on the program of the project has been continuing for a long time. I think this must be the last session of the Council on this topic, so that this document would begin to work toward a stabilization of matters in the agrarian industrial sector of our country. To stop the decline of productivity in the agrarian industrial sector is absolutely necessary today. As reminded in the project program, more than 3,000 collective and state farms, auctioneer societies and other companies are on the verge of bankruptcy. Many farmers are refusing now to work in the fields. At the meeting, also, there were was extremely severe discussion. A representative of the Ministry of Finances proposed to exclude from the program several points wherein it talks about state financial support for agrarian industry. The minister of this sector, Victor Hlustun, categorically disagreed with this. If the aim of this program is to resolve the food problem in Russia, then it must be viewed as part of state policy, said he. It is presumed that the program will be strengthened by a powerful legislative basis. Currently, work is underway over 48 laws, which will help the agrarian industrial sector to begin to develop in the direction opposite from bankruptcy. As previously, the situation is complicated in several regions of the European part of Russia because of the continuing spring flooding. If one looks at the zone of flooding from a helicopter, it doesn't look terrible. Therein is a certain beauty, as in all manifestations of cataclysms. But it's another matter if you imagine that this is your house, and that you can't walk nor drive anywhere, and only go by water. And even so, the flooding is so broad that river boats are dangerous on the water. The waves are too severe. But sea means of conveyance are non-existent here because this is the center of Russia, the Moscow district. Here is the highest density of population. The water level has risen 12 meters above the normal level, and yet there are no human casualties. Material losses, although they are great, but not as great as they could have been. According to the head of the administration of the Moscow district, Anatoly Tizhlov, catastrophe was avoided because of safety, which was thought of in advance. As soon as the threat information was known of, not sparing any funds, they began to take measures, evacuating people, building defensive dams. Among other regions of the Moscow district, the Lukhovitsk region, where we are located right now, suffered most because of the flood, and yet life here was not paralyzed. Those villages, which were in isolation, are receiving food and fuel and even fresh newspapers. Now the water is decreasing, but the decline, according to specialists, could be more dangerous than the increase. Receding waters could wash away roads, construction, and, according to specialists, water reservoirs, and leaving without drinking water several populated areas. For now, this has not happened. The final calculation of losses will be postponed until the beginning of May. The President, Boris Yeltsin, sent to the Premier, Viktor Chernomyrdin, a letter on the need to resolve the problem of non-payments, which provides for the instituting of a procedure on bankruptcy for unprofitable companies. This was reported to Tass by the head of the group of experts of the President, Alexander Lifshitz. In the opinion of the expert, to decide on bankruptcy is just as complicated as it was for liberalization of prices in January of 1992. But if this was the first step to change the economy to a market mode, it is necessary to make the second step as well. At the same time, Boris Yeltsin takes on full responsibility for the second stage of reforms, including the need to deliver a Russian economy from unprofitable companies. Almost every day we say a company has closed down, a plant has stopped functioning, and suddenly on this background there's a celebration. In the auctioneer society, Omsk processing plant, a brick plant, was erected by Yugoslavian Technologies. The basis is a strong line which produces 20 million bricks per year. High quality and relatively inexpensive. The cost of such a brick is 1/4 less than imported ones, and the quality is better. The porous materials which make it retain heat excellently, which is extremely valuable. This red brick is also good to create facades on buildings. It was yesterday when the members of the Tyumen reserve officers served among troops stationed on the territory of CIS and Baltic countries. Today they resigned from active army duty and collided with an entire series of problems. It's difficult to find work, no housing. The recently created Tyumen Association of Reserve Officers unites several companies working in various directions. They have produced a processing plant. The volume of productivity is not large, but their goods are popular in Tyumen. One of the most favorite products is housing. In the work plans is to set up their own construction bases on the condition of contemporary technology, which will provide housing for servicemen who are retired and also buildings for residents of the district. Along the broken and overused lane of socialist economy, one cannot enter the market. But this is not an example for other companies, but the Pskov Auto people understood immediately that to produce the same bus each year is not profitable. So they decided to pave their own lane and restructured the company. On the basis of the Ulyanovsk and Gorky auto plants, they are producing vehicles for farmers, militia, first aid, and microbuses. They're extremely needed in the Russian villages. They also set up services, and therefore today Russians preferring foreign models whose spare parts cost only kopecks to these domestic automobiles. During the last year, 2,500 vehicles came off the assembly line, and this year the current order is 1,000 more. We're working for the consumer in such a way so that having received our technology today, his neighbor or fellow employee, seeing what we produce, would only come to us. We're accustomed to look at the economy, metaphorically speaking, through a rear-view mirror, not noticing the perspective which opens up through the front windshield. In the meantime, the potential of positive changes, as we see, exists. Examples from Tyumen, Omsk, and Pskov not also allow us to glance, but allow us to see the tendencies as a whole. First of all, it becomes clear that conversion must be endured not only by the defense industry, but by all companies whose products are not oriented at market demand. Today, almost 60% of losses of work time because of stoppages of companies is because of the lack of demand for the products. As a result, there is a heightening in the severe crisis of non-payments. This domino principle today has grasped all our industry. From this, it is clear that it is not inflation of demand that we have, but inflation of excesses. The old famous giants who never knew competition are predisposed to eternal illnesses in the new conditions. The decline of such productivity is unavoidable, and the main conclusion is that exclusively on the basis of existing companies, competition will not arise. We need new subjects of the market. Potential power of Russia will be defined by arising and not yet born companies. The government must be the initiator of actions stimulating their appearance. This is only possible with basic structural reforms. By these measures, that is, qualitative progress in the economy, is best to measure concrete political activity. For example, the results of privatization could be tallied by the percentage of yielding vouchers, or by how many percentages, thanks to it, did the yield of labor grow. One may talk about how many companies remained afloat because of discount credits, or one may also assess how many companies, for this reason, increased their competitiveness. But there's only little time left to decide which path to choose. Today, in the Kremlin, the meeting was held of the President of Russia, Boris Yeltsin, with the acting chairman of the Constitutional Court of Russia, Nikolai Vitruk. They discussed the question of the possibility for the passing of the legislative project on the Constitutional Court in the State Duma. Special attention Boris Yeltsin devoted to the criteria in choosing candidates for judges of the Constitutional Court. They must be highly professional lawyers, not representing any party factions. Tomorrow, the Minister of Defense of Russia, Pavel Grachev, will depart for a 3-day visit to Sevastopol, during which practical work is planned with the realization on the agreement on the Black Sea Fleet signed the 15th of April in Moscow by Boris Yeltsin and Leonid Kravchuk. As ITRTASS reports, during the visit, Pavel Grachev plans to meet with the command and the personal staff of the Black Sea Fleet, the leadership of Crimea, the Minister of Defense of Ukraine, Vitaly Radetzky. According to specialists, a possible negative effect on the dialogues could be Ukraine's attempts to interpret in their own way the Moscow agreements. The investigation of the reasons for the catastrophe of the Erebus is conducted in France and Russia at the same time. Remains of the plane were gathered and sent to Novokuznetsk in a special hangar. They're being assembled to in some way resemble the A310. Unfortunately, because of floods, the work is interrupted. The tape recorders, or black boxes, in which more than 200 parameters of the flight are recorded, are in Paris, where there is the necessary apparatus. Already known is the elevation, the speed, and the precise time of the accident. The French side, for the 2nd of May, invites our specialists to jointly modulate the situation and assess the actions of the crew and also the systems functioning. The response reaction to the actions of the crew by the airship and the Also, the reasons for the catastrophe will be defined. However, the questions to the Airbus manufacturers increase, and attempts to blame the crew for everything critics don't endure, although it committed, as it is clear from the tapes, very serious violations. In the cabin, there were children of one of the pilots. Today at 11:50 in the Gulf of Finland, 70 kilometers from St. Petersburg, from the shore, an ice float was severed with 82 fishermen on top of it. As ITRTAS reports, the search rescue services of the regional northwest center of the Ministry on Emergency Situations by 1700 hours from the ice float by helicopter. 50 people were evacuated and 32 were saved by naval services. Internal forces will be called to protect social order during the May 1st days in separate regions, including Moscow. This was stated today at a briefing to the press by the Lieutenant General Kulikov, the Deputy Minister of Internal Affairs, the commander of the internal forces. This was permitted by corresponding plans and instructions, but with strict adherence to the law. And the law on internal forces says that internal forces are not used to disperse the unsanctioned meetings or demonstrations. But the internal forces are called to liquidate mass disorder. The President of Russia, Boris Yeltsin, invited the President of Latvia, Guntis Ulminus, to visit Moscow on the 21st of April with a work visit and sign the previously drafted agreement on the withdrawal of Russian troops from the territory of Latvia and the rent of the radio location station in Skrunda. The invitation of the head of the Russian government was conveyed today to the President of Latvia by the Russian ambassador in Riga, Alexander Hranik. A response to the invitation of the Russian President, Guntis Ulminus, promised to give this evening. I'll remind you the meeting of the two presidents was planned earlier. However, Latvia put it under doubt after the appearance in the press of news of a so-called plan by Russia to set up a military base in Latvia. The Prime Minister of Israel, Yitzhak Rabin, announced the preparedness for a gradual evacuation of forces from the Golan Heights in exchange for peace with Syria. He also stated that the government which he heads is seriously preparing for the possible renewal of peace talks with the Arab partners in the end of April in Washington. 1 week before conducting in South Africa the first historical general all-racial elections, the government and the African National Congress undertook their last desperate efforts to normalize relations with the Zulu organization, the Inkatha Freedom Party. As a result of 2 days of talks, the Zulu organization gave its consent in principle to participate in the elections, which are scheduled from the 26th to the 29th of April. Here, during the war, there was a Jewish ghetto. This is the western part of Warsaw, 4 square kilometers, separated at that time by a high brick wall. Almost 500,000 people were gathered here and doomed for extermination. On the monument, it is written, "To fighters and sufferers." On the 19th of April, 1943, here an uprising burst out, and annually the state is commemorated by laying wreaths and commemorative prayers. These are films from German chronicles. Hitler's order is being carried out. The residents of 500,000 non-people who are still not useful for Germans must disappear from the face of the earth, and the area of a 1 million resident city of Warsaw, which is a constant danger source for a possible revolution, is necessary to cut down. 100,000 residents of the ghetto died from hunger. 300,000 were killed in gas chambers. The rest died during the storming of the ghetto. For almost 1 month, they offered desperate resistance to that attack. Fighters and sufferers. According to the information from the agency RIA, the director of the CIA, James Woolsey, stated to the television company NBC that the Ames case, people suspected in cooperation with intelligence services of the USSR and Russia, is not the only one, and in the near future, an entire series of exposures of American citizens working for foreign intelligence will follow. According to him, after the collapse of communism in East Europe and the Soviet Union and also other East European countries, the CIA received access to a great volume of counterintelligence information. In the beginning of last year, on the television horizon of Germany, one more star began to shine. A so-called alternative television station appeared. A private channel in Köln received the loud name Vox, which in translation means a voice. And now Vox is what one would say near a broken trough. It's become bankrupt. What happened? Vox, whose concept was created by solid journalists, found support among founders and creditors. And second in the world, according to volume, was the editing company Vertismar, also banks and newspapers. It seemed the cash flow would not end, only produce programs and earn money through advertising. And this was the approach of private companies before Vox, including RTL, Sat1 and Prusy, which enjoy currently 70% of the advertising profits on the television market of Germany. The remaining 30% are left for social activist channels living because of government subsidies. But Vox made a mistake, thinking it would fill some sort of a niche, and the expensive overuse received no audiences. Neither did the round table talks, television journals, talking heads on the screen. The rating of Vox was only 1%. The new, more pragmatic directors who replaced the journalists, intellectuals, attempted to correct the situation, announced the channel to be a full-blooded television channel, decided to emphasize films, shows, and even erotica. And the rating rose by 2 to 3%, but this was the limit. And the competition was too strong. Vox announced bankruptcy. Its founders left the channel with losses of hundreds of million marks. Now the company is in the process of liquidation. These are the rules here. The market is ruthless, and someday it will be so with us. Only the strongest survive. With this report, I end the overview of the basic events of the day. In a moment, as usual, the news of sports. Goodbye.
Ну, очень интересная газета. Спринфо. Недорогая подписка в любом отделении связи.
Трест АЛД надежно разместит ваши средства в московской недвижимости и обеспечит вам стабильный доход в размере до 45% годовых в СКВ, до 350% годовых в рублях. Обязательное страхование вклада сведет ваш риск к нулю.
В отличие от любой другой ценной бумаги, акции АО МММ абсолютно ликвидны. То есть вы можете свободно продать их в любом пункте распространения акций АО МММ, причем по цене значительно выше той, которую вы за нее платили. Никаких ограничений по срокам покупки и по количеству акций не предусматривается.
Игорь и Юля, неужели опять спорят? Послушаем, о чем они говорят.
Может быть, не надо? Купим на всем.
Надо, Игорь, надо. АО МММ. Марина Сергеевна, здравствуйте. Куда же вы так спешите?
Проверю еще раз. Положу теперь 300 тысяч.
Поверила. АО МММ.
Выбор есть. Первый пенсионный фонд.
Good evening. The most active topic in sports today is hockey. The third match in the Cup tournament of the International Hockey League ended today in Taliati. The main events began to unfold only in the second period, when Nesterov and Zhiriptsov, during 2 minutes each, scored 1 goal. And then the Dynamos began to play back, and one must note, they didn't plan to give up, and by the end of the match, the result was 3-3. It would seem, what is the price of 1 goal? Even if it's scored in the Muscovites' net, the result would be clear. But Igor Terefeev, playing the main role in the match, brings the long-awaited victory in overtime. And so 4-3, the victory of the Moscow Dynamos, and tomorrow they'll have their 4th match. And again, the theme of hockey. In the first match at the European Youth Championship League, the team of Russia won against the Polish team with a score of 7-1. And today it meets with the German team. For now, we'll talk about the chess news. On the eve of the opening of the Super Tournament for the Kremlin Cup at the Embassy of Great Britain in Moscow was the benevolent tournament. Participants and guests were warmly greeted by the Ambassador of Great Britain, Sir Brian Full. Gary Kasparov, joining with Mike Adams, and Nigel Short with Vladimir Kramnik, simultaneously played a game on 34 boards, providing themselves and their opponents great satisfaction. This competition, the Stars of the Kremlin, I'm very happy that it's becoming a tradition of professional chess players to begin major events with benevolent affairs. The money gathered from this affair, $15,000, will be distributed among Moscow children's hospitals. And for me, it seems to me important for the prestige of our sport that the leading chess masters voluntarily participate in such events. I think it is a very good beginning for such a grandiose event, as unconditionally the Kremlin Cup will be.
Совет директоров чекового инвестиционного фонда МММ Инвест сообщает, что все ставшие акционерами фонда до 20 апреля 1994 года будут иметь право на получение дивиденда в этом году, а также примут участие в очередном розыгрыше лотереи МММ Инвест. Акции фонда вы можете приобрести за ваучеры и рубли во всех почтовых отделениях России.
Тверь Универсалбанк приглашает отраслевые министерства, областные администрации и финансовые компании к реализации программы безналичных расчетов с внедрением банковских векселей Тверь Универсалбанка. Основная цель программы – разрешение кризиса неплатежей. Контактные телефоны в Москве 292 47 00, 274 03 56, 274 03 11, 330 45 62. Тверь Универсалбанк.
Возрождая будущее. Банк «Российский кредит».
Первый пенсионный фонд. Участником становится каждый россиянин от ребенка до пенсионера.
Добрый вечер.
Good evening. Cloudy, windy weather is expected in the north of Russia, and the reason for this is a broad cyclone, the center of which tomorrow will be near the Kursk Peninsula. Therefore, in Murmansk, Arkhangelsk areas and the Republic of Komi, and also the Nenetsk Autonomous District, it will be cloudy with periods of wet snow and rain. The winds are gusty 15 to 18 meters per second. The temperature in the Nenetsk Autonomous District and the northeast of the Republic of Komi at night -3 to 8. During the day, 3 to 5 degrees warmer. On the Kursk Peninsula in Karelia, Arkhangelsk district and the majority of the Republic of Komi at night from -1 to -6 during the day, +1, +6. In the Baltic countries, the weather will improve. Here, there will be only periods of rain. The temperatures during the day, -2, +3 during the day, up to 10 degrees. In central Chernozem areas of Russia, it is cloudy with some clear skies and periods of wet snow and rain. At night, 0 +6, during the day, 7 +12. In Belarus, Ukraine, Moldova, intermittently cloudy, mostly without precipitation. Only in the north of Belarus, there are brief periods of rain. During the day in Belarus, +6, +11. In Ukraine and Moldova, 4 to 7 degrees warmer. Torrential rains in some places with thunderstorms and gusts of wind will pass on the south of Russia. On the lower Don, in the Krasnodarsk and Stavropol areas, the temperatures during the day will reach +10 to +15 degrees. Flooding will continue off populated points in the Don Basin. On the lower Volga, in the middle of the day, cloudiness will increase. In some places, there will be rain and possible thunderstorms. At night, +7, +10. During the day, 13 to 15 degrees. Beyond the Caucasus, warm and sunny. During the day, the temperature will rise up to +25 degrees. In St. Petersburg, partly cloudy tomorrow. In places, precipitation. The winds from the northwest, 5 to 9 meters per second. At night, 0, -2. During the day, +4, +6. In Moscow tomorrow, it will be snow mixed with rain. The winds from the west, 5 to 10 meters per second. The temperatures at night, around 0. During the day, +5 to 7 degrees. And this is the information from the Oceanic Meteorological Center of Russia. I thank you for your attention. Goodbye.